Despite how much shit Denji goes through, I think Chainsaw Man will end positively, like a generic shonen. I mean, to be fair, Chainsaw Man might never end, considering the fact that the devils die and get reborn, creating the possibilities for an almost infinite show. And oh, quick warning, this theory will involve both part 1 and part 2 spoilers, so if you're not caught up, this is your one and only chance. Now, just like in the end of part 1 where Denji finally gets a little bit of his own agency, this theory builds on the same core idea, and argues that's exactly where the story is heading long term. But let's start from the beginning, because when we first see Denji, he is ridden in debt, exploited by the Yakuza, and barely surviving. Then he finally snaps, breaks free, just to be picked up by Makima, who uses his urge to connect, amongst other things, to manipulate him to run his errands. And this of course continues with the rest arc, which I'm not only mentioning because it makes this video relevant considering the movie is now out, where Denji is led to believe that he actually has the possibility for another life without even Makima, which of course Makima reacts to by telling Rest that Denji is his own character, capable of making his own decisions, and that she should respect their love, or something along those lines. And do I even need to talk about what happens afterwards in the manga, man? And even now in part 2 he's still being pulled around in people's plots and schemes. Which brings us to Denji. The core of the theory is obviously the MC, and Denji is not only an anti-hero, but also an anti-protagonist. He's crude, selfish, and sleazy, but beyond that, he's not even a proper protagonist. You see, the way Chainsaw Man is written, Denji doesn't bring the story forward. Rather, other characters bring the story forward through him. To see what I mean, let's compare him to Luffy from One Piece. Luffy has a crystal clear dream, becoming the Pirate King. And that goal pulls the whole story along, for every major arc is about him finding people, making friends, and getting one step closer to the ultimate goal of the One Piece. Denji on the other hand has no dreams beyond sex, food, and basic pleasure. His friendships are by mere chance, and a lot of time they end with them trying to use him, or sacrifice for some major goal. Hell, even Power has more agency than Denji, since she makes her decisions based on her love for Miaoi, and then of course for Denji. And I think this is illustrated very well in the story, because when obstacles do come up, Denji rarely engages with them himself. Instead, he engages with them once an external reward is offered, and usually that reward is superficial. But from time to time, he does come to decisions where he has to choose. And quite frankly, a lot of times it feels like, like one of these pictures. He can choose one door, but both lead to the same place. In other words, it ends with bigger forces at play. Usually those forces are Makima, at least in part 1. From him joining the Devil Hunters to the Res arc, up until the first time he makes his own decisions that's somehow relevant to the story. Which of course is the ending of part 1, which if you know the ending is at best described as bittersweet. However, it is positive development for Denji, as he does take his own agency and stand for himself, and you can clearly see that because in part 2, with Nayuta, he has a much better relationship with the new Control Devil. And this is where we need to talk about the change between Denji from part 1 to part 2. Which admittedly is not a lot, he's still a goofball and still driven on his basic desires, but at least he is standing up for himself a bit more. For example, in part 2 he actually chooses to fight as Chainsaw Man, and sure, it's arguably still a kind of superficial reward to be praised by people, but at least it's by his own decision. It's his own reward based on his own choice, not something someone else gives him. In a sense, you get it. Either way, he's being rewarded for taking his own agency. Before, well, now where things are starting to get beyond this level again and everything is entangled and entwined and there's all these different plots going on, but we'll get to that. Because my basic theory goes like this. If Denji gets rewarded every time that he takes his own agency, then that would mean that the goal of the story is for Denji to ultimately take his own agency and be free from others' influences. If, of course, I'm not wrong. After all, Chainsaw Man is a wet dream for Fujimoto. He is, after all, on record as a masochist, talking about how he got teased in school and liked it. So that the main antagonist for part 1 was a sexy Control Devil, which I gotta figure out right here, by the way, isn't that surprising. And quite frankly, as much as I think the good ending will involve him breaking free and taking his own agency, I would not be surprised if they still have that element in some sort of way, but maybe in a more positive way than it's been before. Either way, I think his reward will be bittersweet. But if we follow the trend, I think Denji should get more and more agency until it comes to like a climax where he is allowed to make a decision and finally proves his own agency and gets rewarded for it. And whether the world's consequences episodes will be good or not from that decision, well, I don't know, but at least they will be good for him, I think. Now, of course, there's no way to know if Chainsaw Man will end with part 2. I personally think Fujimoto will milk this cash cow for as long as possible, but ultimately, in the end, as weird, crazy, and unconventional as Chainsaw Man is, I think the most reasonable ending would be for it to end pretty generically, like a generic shonen where he becomes his own protagonist. Someone with his own agency and goals. At least that's where I think the story is headed at the moment. But what do you think? How do you think Chainsaw Man will end? Write below, and if you like this video, make sure to check this one out. With that said, take care. Bye!